The cargo ship's warning lights flashed red as Jack Thompson finished his coffee. He had made this Mars supply run 20 times before, and everything had always gone smoothly. This time felt different. His ship's sensors picked up an unknown object moving too fast, too close. "Come on, old girl, show me what's out there," Jack muttered, tapping the display screen. The radar showed something massive, at least 3 times the size of his cargo vessel. It didn't match any known human or automated shipping vessel patterns. The radio crackled. No words came through, just strange clicking sounds mixed with what might have been speech. Jack reached for the emergency beacon, but his hand never made it. A bright purple light filled the cockpit, and everything went dark. He woke up with a headache that felt like someone had used his skull for drum practice. The air smelled wrong, too clean, like a hospital, but with a hint of something sweet he couldn't place. Jack kept his eyes closed and focused on gathering information. The surface beneath him felt smooth and cool. His wrists and ankles were bound by something that hummed slightly. The gravity felt off, maybe about half of Earth's pull. Voices spoke nearby in hushed tones. The language wasn't human. It sounded like water running over rocks mixed with bird calls. Jack had to fight to keep his breathing steady when he felt something cold press against his neck. "Subject appears to be in adequate physical condition," a mechanical voice translated. "Minimal damage from the extraction process." "Excellent," another translated voice replied. "The specimen from this unexplored region will provide valuable data. Note the dense muscle structure, quite unusual for a low-gravity species." Jack wanted to laugh. These aliens thought he came from a low-gravity world. He continued playing unconscious, learning more. The less they knew about his true capabilities, the better. "Prepare it for primary testing," the second voice ordered. "Standard protocol for Class C planetary origins." Jack felt himself being moved. The restraints hummed louder for a moment as they were released from whatever had held them in place. Through barely opened eyes, he caught his first glimpse of his captors. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, but looked fragile. Their limbs were thin, almost delicate, with pale blue-tinted skin that seemed to shimmer under the bright lights. Their movements were graceful but cautious, as if they feared breaking themselves. 4 of them transferred him to what felt like a floating platform. Jack remained limp, counting steps and turns as they moved through corridors. The aliens' conversation revealed more about their mistake. They assumed all newly discovered species came from worlds similar to their own. Their arrogance was stunning. They hadn't even bothered to check Earth's gravity or atmospheric conditions before grabbing him. They reached what seemed to be a processing center. Other aliens, different species by the sound of their movements and voices, worked at various stations. Jack risked opening his eyes a tiny bit more. Through his lashes, he saw other creatures in cells along the walls. Some looked almost human, others were completely alien, but all shared one thing. They moved like they came from low-gravity worlds. "Begin basic diagnostics," the mechanical voice translated. "Check for compatibility with enhancement procedures." A new alien approached, holding something that looked like a medical scanner. Jack felt it pass over his body, followed by surprised chirps and clicks from the operator. "These readings cannot be correct," the translation came through. "The bone density and muscle mass are far beyond expected parameters. Recalibrate and scan again," ordered what seemed to be the leader. "The equipment must be malfunctioning." Jack fought to keep his expression neutral. These aliens had no idea what they'd done. They hadn't just kidnapped someone. They kidnapped a human from Earth, one of the galaxy's deadliest death worlds. But they would learn. Oh, they would learn. For now, though, Jack would wait. He would watch. He would learn their routines, their weaknesses, their technologies. He had been through worse during his military days, and patience had always served him well. These aliens thought they had captured a helpless specimen from an unknown backwater world. Their first mistake was kidnapping him. Their second mistake would be underestimating him. And if Jack had anything to say about it, They wouldn't live long enough to make a third. The testing chamber gleamed with polished metal and strange devices. Jack lay strapped to an examination table, watching the alien scientists prepare their equipment. They still hadn't realized he was fully conscious, and he intended to keep it that way. Their translated conversations had told him everything he needed to know. These beings called themselves the Nix, and they saw themselves as the galaxy's greatest scientific minds. "Begin the endurance assessment," the lead scientist commanded. The mechanical translator made the words sound flat and emotionless. "Start with standard resistance testing." Jack felt the table shift, tilting until he stood almost upright. The restraints adjusted, and he had to concentrate to keep his muscles slack. A device lowered from the ceiling, attaching itself to his chest. It began to push, slowly increasing pressure. "Subject showing remarkable resilience," one of the scientists noted. "Increasing force to level 2. The pressure doubled. To Jack, it felt like someone leaning against him. Annoying, but nothing close to dangerous. He heard excited chirping from the observers as they increased the force again and again. "Impossible," the lead scientist declared. "The specimen's bone structure should have begun to crack at level 3. We are now at level 5 with no signs of distress." Another scientist approached, this one holding what looked like a needle. "Perhaps the physical format is misleading. Let us test its chemical tolerance." The injection burned through Jack's veins, but years of military training helped him control his reaction. He'd been through worse during survival training on Earth. These aliens had no concept of what humans could endure. "Heart rate elevated but stable," a junior scientist reported. "Blood chemistry showing minimal disruption. This cannot be correct." The lead scientist moved closer, studying Jack with large, silvery eyes. "Fascinating. The specimen's cellular structure is unlike anything in our database. The resilience suggests an adaptation to extreme conditions." More tests followed. They exposed him to temperature changes that would have killed their own kind, only to find that humans could survive far worse on Earth. They tested his reflexes, unknowingly using only a fraction of their equipment's full capacity because they assumed nothing could survive the higher settings. Through it all, Jack kept count. 12 scientists in the room. 2 guards by the door. 3 different control panels for the restraint systems. The artificial gravity in the chamber was set to what felt like Mars level. They'd probably thought they were being kind by keeping it low. "Proceed with the enhancement procedure," the lead scientist finally ordered. "Perhaps we can learn why this specimen is so resilient." They wheeled in new equipment. Jack caught glimpses of surgical tools and containers filled with glowing liquid. Now came the dangerous part. They planned to cut him open while he was still conscious. A new voice entered the conversation. "Sir, I found something concerning in the database." "Not now," the lead scientist dismissed. "We are at a crucial stage." "But sir, I think we should check the specimen's planet of origin. These readings." "The origin is irrelevant. All newly discovered species come from standard worlds. Proceed with the procedure." Jack almost smiled. At least one of them had started to figure it out, but they wouldn't listen. The arrogance of the Nix would be their downfall. The surgical tool descended toward his chest. Jack kept his breathing steady, waiting for exactly the right moment. He had seen enough, learned enough. The Nix's biggest mistake wasn't just capturing a human. It was assuming that their technology could hold someone who had evolved on a world 3 times as harsh as anything they had ever known. The first cut never came. The facility's lights suddenly flashed red, and alarms began to blare. The scientists froze, looking around in confusion. "Warning," a new mechanical voice announced. "Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel, implement emergency protocols." Jack knew this was his chance. As the scientists turned toward the door, he finally allowed himself a small, grim smile. Sometimes the universe had perfect timing. Now he would show them exactly what a creature from Earth could do. The junior researcher named Lynn raced through the facility's corridors. her thin fingers trembling as she clutched her datapad. The alarms from Sector 7 still blared, but she had discovered something far more terrifying. She burst into the facility director's office without announcing herself. "Director, we've made a terrible mistake," she gasped out, her translator struggling to keep up with her rapid speech. "The new specimen. I checked its origin world's data. It's from Earth." The director looked up from his screens, his silver eyes narrowing. "Earth? I don't recognize that designation. It's classified as a Category 5 Deathworld," Lynn said, her voice shaking. "The gravity is 3 times our standard. The temperature ranges are extreme. The atmospheric pressure alone would crush most species, and the life forms there." She paused, struggling to continue. The director's skin paled from blue to almost white. "Impossible. No intelligent life could evolve in such conditions. Your data must be incorrect." Lynn projected her findings onto the office wall. Charts and readings filled the space, all pointing to one terrifying conclusion. The humans don't just survive there, they thrive. Their bodies are built to endure conditions that would kill any of us instantly, and we've been testing one like it was a standard specimen. The facility shook. Another alarm joined the first. "Containment breach in Sector 4, the automated system announced. Security teams respond immediately." The director stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "How many sectors between 4 and the testing chamber?" 2, Lynn whispered. "But sir, that's not the worst part. These readings from the specimen, the human. During our tests, we weren't even challenging him. Everything we thought was maximum endurance. That was barely a fraction of what they can survive." More alarms, more breaches. The director slammed his hand on his desk's communication panel. "This is Director Call. Implement kill protocols in the testing chamber immediately. Use maximum force. I repeat, maximum force." The response came back garbled, mixed with sounds of chaos. "Sir, the specimen. It's gone. The restraints, they're torn apart, like they were made of." The transmission cut off in static. Lynn's datapad showed security feeds from around the facility. The human moved through them like a nightmare, each camera showing a brief glimpse before going dark. He wasn't running wild or causing random destruction. Each movement was calculated, purposeful. "Look at his eyes," Lynn said, zooming in on one image. "He's not scared or confused. He's hunting." The director grabbed his emergency beacon, but Lynn shook her head. "Help won't arrive in time. Don't you understand? We've been studying him, but he's been studying us. Learning our weaknesses. Our security systems are designed to stop standard specimens, but he's from a world where everything is trying to kill everything else. All the time. They call it nature." Another crash echoed through the facility. "Closer now." "How?" the director demanded. "How did one primitive creature from a harsh world get loose and cause all this?" Lynn laughed, the sound holding no humor. "Primitive? Sir, they'd reached their moon using chemical rockets. They built cities in deserts and frozen wastelands. They carry devices that can access their entire planet's knowledge in their pockets. They're not primitive. They're survivors. And we?" She looked at her datapad again, watching another security camera go dark. "We just showed one of them all of our weaknesses." The lights in the office flickered. The director lunged for his private exit, but Lynn didn't move. She knew it was pointless. "Sir," she called after him, "one more thing about humans. They have a concept called revenge, and we've been torturing one of their kind for 3 days." The office door slid open. Jack Thompson stood there, his frame filling the doorway in a way that now seemed much more threatening. His eyes moved from Lynn to the closing private exit door and back. "You're the one who figured it out," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Smart. Want to help me free the other test subjects." Lynn looked at her datapad one last time, then set it down. Perhaps helping the human was the only way to survive what was coming. After all, the data was clear. You don't survive a death world without learning when to switch sides. The containment cells stretched out before Jack like a twisted museum of alien life. Each transparent wall revealed creatures from across the galaxy, all subjected to the Nix's cruel experiments. Lynn hurried beside him, her steps quick and light compared to his measured stride. "The security protocols," she explained, her translator working overtime. "Each cell block has separate controls. They designed it this way to prevent mass escapes." She paused at a control panel. "But they never planned for someone with your capabilities." Jack nodded, scanning the cells. Most of the beings inside watched him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some pressed against the transparent barriers, their various appendages and sensory organs focused on the strange duo of human and Nick scientist. "Tell them," Jack said, his voice carrying through the corridor. "Tell them what I am and what I'm offering." Lynn activated the translation system. Her voice echoed in a dozen different languages. "This is a human, a being from a world that would kill most of us in minutes. He has broken free, and he offers you the same chance. But we must work together." Excited chittering and movement filled the cells. A tall, reed-thin creature with crystalline skin stepped forward in its cell. Its translated voice came through clear. "The Nix said cooperation was impossible between species, that we were too different. The Nix were wrong about a lot of things," Jack replied, moving to the cell's control panel. "Where I come from, different species work together all the time. We call it an ecosystem." He looked at the panel, then at Lynn. "Show me how to open it without triggering alarms." Lynn's fingers danced across the controls. The barrier disappeared with a soft hum. The crystalline being stepped out, its form catching the light. "I am from a world of perpetual twilight," it said. "My people build cities in crystal caves. We are strong in darkness." "Perfect," Jack smiled. "Because we're going to need all kinds of strengths." He turned to the next cell. "Lynn?" One by one, they freed the test subjects. Each brought unique abilities. Beings that could see heat signatures, others that could squeeze through tiny spaces, some with natural climbing abilities that defied gravity. Each one had been captured and tortured by the Nix, and each one wanted justice. A small creature that looked like a cross between a cat and a bird fluttered to Jack's shoulder. "The ventilation systems," it chirped through the translator. "My people can navigate them. We can be your eyes." "And my people," rumbled a hulking figure made mostly of plant matter, "can block security forces. Our bodies absorb energy weapons." Jack listened as each species offered their abilities. The Nix had chosen their test subjects for their unique traits, never imagining these differences could be turned against them. Human military strategy combined with alien abilities, it was time to show the galaxy what cooperation really meant. "They'll be expecting us to run," Jack said, gathering everyone's attention. "To make a break for the ship bays. But that's not what we're going to do." He looked at Lynn. "Show me the facility's layout." Lynn projected a holographic map. Jack studied it, his Earth-born mind recognizing patterns the Nix had missed. "There," he pointed. "The central control hub. They'll think it's too heavily defended for escaped test subjects to attempt. But they don't know what we can do together." The crystal being stepped forward. "I can distract their sensors. My body reflects their scanning beams. My people can short out their security fields," chittered a small electric blue creature. One by one, they'd built a plan. Species that had never met before found ways to combine their abilities. Jack moved among them, organizing, suggesting, leading not through force, but through the human ability to adapt and innovate. "They called us specimens," Jack said finally, looking at the gathered creatures. "They thought they were studying the galaxy's weaknesses. Instead, they'd brought together its strengths." He turned to the massive security door that led to the facility's heart. "Ready?" The answer came in a dozen languages, but they all meant the same thing. Yes, the Nix's greatest mistake hadn't just been capturing a human. It had been giving that human a reason to show the galaxy what unity really meant. The central control hub's massive doors loomed before them, gleaming under harsh artificial lights. Security forces had gathered behind makeshift barriers, their weapons trained on the corridor. They thought they were prepared. They were wrong. "Remember," Jack said quietly, "they expect us to act like frightened test subjects." He nodded to the small flying creatures who disappeared into the ventilation shafts. Through their eyes, relayed by their telepathic companions, he could see the Nexus positions. Their overconfidence was obvious. They'd never faced organized resistance before. The crystal being stepped forward, its body catching and reflecting the security sensors. Alarms blared as the system detected threats in a dozen wrong locations. The Nyx guards turned, confused by multiple phantom readings. That's when Jack moved. On Earth, he had been just another cargo pilot. Here, in the lighter gravity, he was something else entirely. He crossed the space between the barriers in 2 bounds, his Earth-bred muscles launching him forward with explosive force. The first guard fired, but the plant-based creature moved faster, absorbing the energy blast. Another guard tried to activate a containment field, but the electric blue beings had already shorted out the systems. The Nyx's carefully layered defenses fell apart as each escaped specimen played their part. "Impossible," one of the guards shouted, backing away as Jack landed among them. "The gravity restraints are at maximum." Jack smiled grimly. "Maximum for you, maybe." His fist connected with the guard's environment suit, cracking it with ease. On Earth, he'd had to pull his punches. Here, he could finally show what a human could really do. The battle was brief but intense. The Nyx had never imagined their test subjects could work together, never planned for their different abilities to complement each other so perfectly. Their weapons were useless against beings that absorbed energy. Their sensors were blind, dazzled by crystalline reflections. Their communications were jammed by natural electromagnetic pulses. And through it all moved Jack, the human from Earth, the Deathworlder they had so foolishly underestimated. Each movement was precise, calculated. He didn't waste energy on showing off or revenge. This was survival, pure and simple, just like on Earth. Lynn worked at a control panel, her fingers flying as she bypassed security protocols she had helped design. "The internal defenses," she called out. "They're trying to flood the section with paralytic gas." A cluster of small, filter-feeding aliens moved into position around the vents. "Our bodies naturally clean toxins from the air," they announced proudly. "It is how we survive in our world's poisonous seas." Jack reached the main security door. The Nyx had built it to withstand anything they could imagine, but they had imagined based on their own world, their own limitations. He planted his feet, muscles tensing. "Wait," Lynn called out. The doors reinforced with. The sound of screaming metal cut her off. Jack's fingers dug into the seam of the door, tendons standing out on his arms. On Earth, this would have been impossible. But here, in this lighter gravity, against materials designed for much weaker beings. The door tore open. Behind it, the Nyx scientists and officials stared in horror, their greatest security measure, defeated by raw physical strength they hadn't believed could exist. "How?" the facility director demanded, backing away. "You're just a specimen. A test subject. This isn't possible." Jack stepped through the ruined doorway, the other freed beings moving in behind him. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" he asked, walking forward steadily. "Not the kidnapping. Not the torture. Not even the bad research." He gestured to the allies around him. "Your biggest mistake was thinking that being different made us weak. On Earth, we learned a long time ago that diversity makes us stronger." The director reached for an emergency control, but it was too late. The freed specimens had already taken their positions. Each one knew their role, each one ready to use their unique abilities. Jack looked at the gathered Nyx officials, seeing the moment they finally understood what they had done. They hadn't just captured a human. They had given a Deathworlder a cause, allies, and a reason to show the galaxy exactly why Earth was classified as one of the most dangerous worlds in known space. The control hub screens filled the circular room with a pale blue glow. Jack stood at the main console while Lynn worked beside him, her fingers dancing across the controls. Around them, their unlikely alliance of escaped test subjects secured the room and its terrified Nix occupants. "The facility's communication systems are yours," Lynn announced, stepping back from the console. "We can broadcast across all known frequencies." Jack nodded, looking at the gathered aliens who had fought beside him. Time to let the galaxy know what happened here. He pressed the broadcast button, and his voice carried through every speaker in the facility and beyond, translated into hundreds of languages. "To all species in known space, this is Jack Thompson of Earth. 3 days ago, I was kidnapped by the Nix Collective for their experiments. They made 3 crucial mistakes. First, they didn't research their target. Second, they underestimated not just me, but every species they captured. And third," he paused, letting his words sink in, "they thought they could break us." The crystal being stepped forward, its voice joining the broadcast. "They took me from my twilight world, thinking my light-refracting abilities made me valuable test subject. Instead, I used those same abilities to blind their sensors." One by one, the other freed specimens added their voices. Each told their story of capture, of torture disguised as science, and of how they turned their unique traits against their captors. The Nix officials watched in horror as their secrets were exposed to the galaxy. "But this isn't just about escape or revenge," Jack continued. "This is about something the Nix never understood. On Earth, we have a saying, 'The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.' They collected specimens with unique abilities, thinking they could study our weaknesses. Instead, they gave us the chance to show our strength." The small flying creatures swooped through the room, their natural sensors detecting approaching Nix reinforcements. "Ships approaching," they reported. "Multiple vessels on intercept course." Jack smiled. "Perfect. More witnesses." He turned to the facility director, who sat bound with the other officials. "Your own protocols are working against you now. Every ship in range will hear this broadcast. Every world will know what you've done." The electric blue beings had connected themselves to the facility's power grid, boosting the transmission strength. The plant-based creatures stood guard, their bodies ready to absorb any weapon fire. Each escaped specimen had found their role, turning the carefully controlled research facility into their stronghold. "To any ships approaching this facility," Jack broadcast, "we welcome your arrival. The specimens here are now free beings, and we have evidence of the Nix Collective's crimes." Evidence we're transmitting now. Lynn had already begun sending the research data, every test, every torture session, every violation of galactic law. The Nix's own meticulous record-keeping became their downfall. "Your own data shows that Earth's gravity is 3 times what you considered survivable," Jack said to the director. "That our atmospheric pressure would crush your bones. That our temperature ranges would kill you instantly. You knew all this, it was in your databases, but you never bothered to check before you grabbed me." A new voice crackled over the communication system. "Research Facility 7, this is the Galactic Council Peace Force. We have received your transmission and are moving to secure the facility. Stand down all defenses." The director slumped in his restraints. Everything his organization had built, every secret they had kept, was now exposed. And it had taken just one human, one Deathworlder, to bring it all down. Jack looked at his unlikely allies. Beings from across the galaxy, each unique, each valuable in their own way. "The Peace Force will be here soon," he told them. "You'll all have the chance to return to your homes, or," he paused, an idea forming, "or we could show the galaxy what different species can achieve when we work together." The creatures looked at each other, then at Jack. They had fought together, escaped together, and won together. Perhaps this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. "After all," Jack said, smiling at his new friends, If a human from a death world can work alongside beings from across the galaxy, imagine what else is possible. 1 year after the next incident, Jack stood before the Galactic Council. The Grand Chamber stretched high above him, filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. The lighter gravity still felt strange, even after all this time, but he had learned to control his movements carefully. The Interspecies Cooperation Initiative has exceeded all expectations, he reported, his words translated into every known language. What started in that research facility has grown into something unprecedented. Holoprojections appeared around him, showing scenes from across the galaxy. The crystal beings from the Twilight world now worked with space station engineers, their natural light-bending abilities revolutionizing stealth technology. The electric blue creatures had transformed power distribution systems on dozens of worlds. Each species that had escaped that day had found new ways to share their unique abilities. But more importantly, Jack continued, we've changed how the galaxy sees differences. He gestured to Lynn, who stood beside him. After the facility's fall, she had become one of the strongest advocates for cooperation between species. The Nyx Collective saw our differences as weaknesses to be studied and exploited. Lynn added, they were wrong. In the past year, we've seen breakthrough after breakthrough as species learned from each other. Problems that seemed unsolvable became simple when viewed from multiple perspectives. The small flying creatures that had once been test subjects now served as navigation experts on deep space missions. The plant-based beings had helped terraform hostile worlds. Each former specimen had found their place not as a subject to be studied, but as equals contributing their strengths. There's an old human saying, Jack said, smiling at his assembled team. Sometimes the worst situations bring out the best in people, or in this case, beings. A ripple of translated laughter moved through the chamber. The council's chief administrator, a being of pure energy contained in a special field, moved forward. The question before us today is whether to make the initiative permanent and to expand its scope across all known space. Jack looked at his companions. The crystal being nodded, its faceted surface catching the light. The small flying creatures perched on his shoulders, their presence a reminder of how far they'd come. Even some of the Nyx, those who like Lynn had seen the error of their ways, stood with them. A year ago, I was a cargo pilot who got kidnapped by scientists who didn't do their homework, Jack said, drawing more laughter. They thought they were collecting specimens of the galaxy's weaknesses. Instead, they'd brought together beings who showed the galaxy its true strength. He walked to the center of the chamber, his movements measured in the low gravity. Humans come from what you call a death world. Earth tried to kill us so many times that we learned to adapt, to change, to work together. We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about working together, about combining different strengths. The chamber was silent now, every being focused on his words. The Nyx thought they were superior because they didn't understand that every world, every species, every being has something unique to offer. They saw our differences as weaknesses to be studied. We proved that those differences are what make us strong. The chief administrator's energy field pulsed with approval. The vote will now begin. One by one, the representatives cast their votes. Jack watched with his team as the results appeared in the air above them. When the final tally appeared, the chamber erupted in a chorus of different sounds: cheers, clicks, hums, and whistles of approval. The initiative is now permanent, the administrator announced, and Jack Thompson of Earth will continue as its director. Jack looked at his team. No longer specimens, no longer victims, but pioneers of a new age of cooperation. The Nyx had kidnapped him thinking they would learn the secrets of different species. Instead, they had accidentally created something far more powerful, proof that the galaxy's greatest strength was its diversity. Well, he said to his companions, who's ready to show the galaxy what we can really do together? The answer came in a dozen different languages, but they all meant the same thing. The Nyx's final mistake hadn't just been kidnapping a Deathworlder. It had been giving the galaxy a reason to unite, to grow, and to prove that sometimes the worst intentions can lead to the best results.